Bangladesh, a country marked by its resilience and rich cultural history, has seen its fair share of political turmoil. Among the recent and most significant events are the student protests that shook the nation, drawing both national and international attention. These protests were not just about road safety or the enforcement of traffic laws. They revealed deeper issues within Bangladeshi society and governance, particularly under the leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The catalyst: the tragic deaths. In July 2018, 2 high school students were tragically killed by a speeding bus in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. The incident, which took place on a busy road in the city, ignited a firestorm of outrage across the nation. The deaths were seen as a reflection of the widespread chaos and negligence that plagued the country's transportation system. Students, already frustrated with the lack of road safety, took to the streets to demand justice and enforce traffic regulations, sparking what would become one of the most significant youth-led movements in recent Bangladeshi history. The protests, a movement for change. What began as a small, localized protest quickly gained momentum. Thousands of students, many in their school uniforms, took to the streets, blocking roads, checking vehicle licenses, and even directing traffic themselves. Their demands were simple: justice for the deceased students, safer roads, and stricter enforcement of traffic laws. The protests were largely peaceful, with students demonstrating a level of organization and discipline that surprised many observers. However, the government's response was swift and severe. Authorities deployed police and security forces to quell the protests, leading to violent clashes between students and law enforcement. Reports of beatings, tear gas, rubber bullets, and even live ammunition being used against the protesters surfaced, sparking outrage both within Bangladesh and internationally. The role of Sheikh Hasina. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who has been in power since 2009, faced significant criticism during the protests. Her government's heavy-handed response was seen by many as indicative of an increasingly authoritarian regime. Under her leadership, Bangladesh has experienced economic growth and infrastructure development, but these achievements have often been overshadowed by concerns over human rights, freedom of speech, and political repression. Hasina's administration was accused of attempting to suppress the student protests rather than addressing their legitimate concerns. The government's narrative shifted from acknowledging the tragedy and the need for reform to labeling the protests as politically motivated and accusing opposition parties of instigating unrest. This shift in narrative allowed the government to justify the use of force against the protesters, further fueling public anger. The aftermath: a divided nation. The student protests eventually subsided, but the underlying issues that fueled them remain unresolved. The government did introduce some reforms in response to the protests, such as setting up mobile courts to oversee traffic violations and promising stricter enforcement of road safety laws. However, many critics argue that these measures were merely cosmetic and did not address the root causes of the problem. The protests also highlighted the deep divisions within Bangladeshi society, particularly between the younger generation and the political establishment. Many young Bangladeshis feel disillusioned with the country's leadership, seeing it as corrupt, out of touch, and resistant to change. The heavy-handed response to the protests only served to reinforce these perceptions, leading to a growing sense of frustration and alienation among the youth. International reactions and human rights concerns. The international community closely watched the events unfold in Bangladesh, with several human rights organizations condemning the government's actions. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch were among the organizations that called for restraint and respect for the protesters' rights to peaceful assembly and free expression. The United Nations also expressed concern over the situation, urging the Bangladeshi government to ensure the safety and security of all citizens, particularly the students. The government's response to the protests also raised questions about the state of democracy in Bangladesh. Under Sheikh Hasina's leadership, the country has seen a significant erosion of democratic norms, with crackdowns on dissent, curbs on press freedom, and the jailing of opposition leaders becoming increasingly common. The student protests were seen by many as a litmus test for the government's commitment to democracy and human rights, a test that critics argue it failed. A call for reflection and reform. The 2018 student protests in Bangladesh were a powerful reminder of the need for meaningful reform in the country. While the immediate catalyst was the tragic deaths of 2 students, the movement quickly evolved into a broader critique of the government's failure to address the concerns of its citizens, particularly the youth. Sheikh Hasina's response to the protests highlighted the growing authoritarianism in Bangladesh, raising serious questions about the future of democracy in the country. As Bangladesh continues to grapple with these challenges, it is crucial for the government to listen to the voices of its people, particularly the younger generation, and to take meaningful steps towards reform. Without this, the divisions within society are likely to deepen, leading to further unrest and instability in the future. The student protests may have subsided, but the issues they highlighted remain, and they will not be easily ignored. What do you think about the student protests in Bangladesh and the response from the government? Do you believe meaningful change is possible? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this article insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis and discussions on global events. Thanks for watching.